Hello, my name is Igor Smirnov. I'm from Remote Chess Academy, and it's my pleasure to welcome you into our webinar, The Art of Defense in Chess. Why are we talking about this topic today? It's a matter of the fact that the modern chess players are highly aggressive. They learn gambit opening lines, they solve lots of tactical puzzles, and they study typical mating patterns and so on. Therefore, you must be ready to face their violent attacks, and you need to know how to deal with them. Otherwise, you will face serious problems and you will experience annoying losses. Let me ask you one question. Now the question is on the slide that you can see right now on the screen. You can see a couple of questions. Like, have you ever experienced the situations like this, when your opponent played tricky openings and you were not sure what to do? Or when you felt that your opponent plays an incorrect sacrifice, but still you're not entirely sure how to deal with that? Have you ever experienced a situation like that? Please let me know. Oh yeah, I see that for most of you that is true and it really relates to you. Well, first of all, let me tell you one good news. You're not alone. Because as I can see right now in the chat area, almost everybody says that this is true for them. And this happens because in chess the topic of attack is much more popular. You can easily find a lot of materials about how to attack properly, while there is a serious deficit in materials about defense. And that's what we're going to sort out today. Today I will show you the 3 golden rules of defense. And you will see that by applying only these 3 simple rules, in most of the cases you will be able to find proper defensive moves easily. We will be analyzing the games of really strong players, and you will see how they do it in their games, and right after this webinar you will learn how to do the same. Okay, then now we will start observing the examples. And here is the first one. This is a position from my game. I played with white. And right now, this is a pretty common and standard position. So the normal move for black would be to play c6, probably protecting the d5 pawn because currently it has been attacked. And in order to protect the pawn, black probably needs to play c6, and after that we'll have an approximately equal position. Maybe white will play bishop f4 and get slightly better middle game position. But in the real game, it did not happen, and instead of that, the black player played a different move. So let's come back to the actual game. And here black played f4. And although I see that some students have already seen this game, in any case it will be useful to analyze it once again, because we will analyze it from the standpoint of defense. Okay, so black just played f4, and this is a little bit tricky idea because black is going to start that attack against white's kingside. So the question is how to deal with such gambit ideas and with such aggressive players. Well, obviously, right now white needs to capture the pawn. It was left unprotected, so why not to capture it? And after that, black obviously should play king to h8. And now this is a question to you. So we can see the position where black sacrificed the pawn for getting initiative position and possibly to start an attack against white's kingside. potentially black can play f3, trying to break through there and destroy the white's castle, or maybe bring more pieces to the king side with queen to h4, or maybe play bishop c6, bringing another piece into play. So black has a couple of things to do. And now this is a question for you. How do you think? How should white play here? So please, in the chat area, let me know your opinion about that. How would you play here as white? And after that, we will start analyzing your ideas. There are a couple of suggestions, and basically the two most popular suggestions are either queen h5 or maybe f3. Okay, let's give it a try. So queen h5 is a tempting move, that's for sure. So let's go into that line. After that, obviously white is attacking black's h7 pawn, and black needs to do something about that. He will play g6, and then the queen needs to go somewhere. Probably it's more logical to go to h6, because otherwise white could play queen f3 straight away. And if white plays queen h6, then I agree with you that here there is no direct way for black to continue his attack. But at the same time, you can see that the queen is somewhat offside. It's not that easy for white to bring it back into play. And in some variations, potentially, black even may try to capture that queen. Of course, it probably wouldn't happen, but anyway, potentially the queen even may be trapped after rook to f7 following with bishop to f8. So this line doesn't seem to be so perfect for white. Let's come back and try to find any alternatives. Okay, another suggestion was to play f3 in the starting position instead of queen h5. Okay, I understand your point. With this move f3, you are going to stop black from playing that move. Anyway, after that, black will probably continue his attack in a similar manner. He'll play like queen to h4 maybe, and then at the moment he's attacking the rook onto e1, and later he can bring more pieces into play with, like, let's say if white protects the rook with bishop d2, then black can bring more pieces into play with rook to f6, and then threatening rook to h6, and overall it looks like black's attack is keep going. After that, it will be not that easy for white to stop black's attack on the h file. And that's why we may conclude that even though the f3 move seems to be very logical for white, in reality it doesn't work that great. Okay, let's come back to the initial position, and now I will tell you the first rule of defense. This is the rule which you need to remember very well, because it's very important and it is applicable almost for any position when you need to find a proper defensive move. First of all, when you're facing the situation where you need to defend, first you need to clarify opponent's threat. This is the rule which you must keep in mind. It means that, first of all, you need to understand which dangerous threats your opponent can potentially execute. For example, at the moment, what if black tries to play f3? Is it dangerous for white or not? Let's try to imagine that situation. I will now play any move for white. I will, let's say, play a3. It's just to see what black is going to do. Of course, white shouldn't play such a silly move as a3. Anyway, we're just trying to understand the black's idea. So let's say it is black's to move, and he plays f3. After that, well, first of all, white can play bishop g5, taking the queen, and there will be no way for black to avoid an exchange. But even if white plays simply g3, then you can see that there is no way for black to continue his attack. The only potential idea black might have in some variations is to bring his queen to h3, and then try to deliver the mate on g2. But there is no practical way for black to do so. And even if black tries and succeed in this idea to maneuver the queen along some diagonals to the h3 square, in the end it's enough for white to play bishop to f1 and he will cover the king side completely, so there is no danger for white at all. This means that the move f3 is totally undangerous for white and there is no reason for white to worry about that. Now let's come back to the main line. And we already may conclude that there is no need for white to play f3 by himself, because the f3 is not the actual threat. The other two moves that black has here, the moves queen h4 or bishop c6, are much more dangerous, because if we imagine the situation like that, let's say again I'll make that move for white, the a3 move, just to see what black is going to do. After that, black will, let's say, play queen to h4, and on the next move he's ready to play bishop c6, and then potentially black even may sacrifice that bishop onto g2, following with f3 check, and it's gonna be really dangerous for white. That's why we may conclude that actually the real threat from black side is to play bishop c6. And now we can come back to the main position, to the starting position of this variation, and we may conclude that actually the only thing white should worry about is how to prevent the move bishop c6. And as some students suggested, the correct way for white is to capture that pawn onto b7. The point is that this move, which seems to be greedy, and it seems like white is just capturing the material, but in reality this is a defensive move which neutralizes the main potential threat from the black side. Okay, let's go next. So black played queen h4. Now, we already know that before you start thinking about your moves, you need to clarify an opponent's threat. This is the first rule of defense. And here we already know that the only potential idea of f3 is not dangerous for white, because white is going to reply with g3, and there will be nothing. If you concluded that there are no actual threats from the side of your opponent, then you may continue your own plan. And that's why here white played bishop to d2. Now black tried to continue his attack, so he played rook to b8, attacking the queen. Obviously the queen must go back, so queen to d5 was played. Okay, I see that some students asks why not queen to f3. Let's take a look. If white plays queen to f3, it's definitely possible. At the same time here black can go bishop g4 and it'll force the queen to go to another square anyway. Although I don't say that queen f3 is horribly bad, it doesn't change the situation dramatically, but nevertheless, if black wants, he can force white to remove the queen from that square anyway. Yeah, the one student says that the queen is not a good blocker, and that is true. So white played queen d5 to keep the queen in the game, and black replied with rook to f6. After that, there is the new situation where we need to think what white should do now. Okay, first let's try to realize what black is going to do. If I play anything for white sides, let's say I'll play the move like c4, the move which is quite logical and aggressive, white is going to play c5. In that variation, black will probably continue with rook h6, which was an intention of his previous move, and white is forced to play h3. This is the only move. Then ideally black would prefer either to sacrifice his bishop onto h3 straight away, or maybe to support this sacrifice with some preparation moves first. Let's say black may try to play rook to f8 and then he will create a new potential threat of f3, which may be realized instantly or after the black's capture onto the h3. And now we can notice that all of the black's pieces are taking part into his assault on the king side. And this is really, really dangerous. Some student asks, what if black goes with his rook to b6? So let's take a step back and have a look at that position. If black goes with his rook onto b6, then I guess your idea is to prepare the move bishop c6. Then it's my question to you, how do you think? What's going to happen if black really plays bishop c6 on the next move? Yeah, that's right. A lot of students has noted that actually the move rook b6 weakens the last rank, and white can take advantage of it straight away with the move queen to a8, and this is mate. And even if bishop c6 would be possible, then white can capture that bishop and then deliver mate with his rook after the move rook to b6. That's why the move rook b6 is logical for black, but it's impossible in this particular situation. Okay, let's come back. Anyway, we have seen that if white allows black to execute such a strong pressure on the king side, it may be really, really dangerous for him. So let's make a step backward and think what white can do in order to prevent this from happening. So we're going back to the position where black just played rook to f6. And now the question is, what should white do? Here I'm going to tell you the second most important rule of defense, and you need to think about it very, very carefully and remember it very well. Here is the rule. You need to detect opponent's pieces on your half of the board and neutralize them. While talking about your half of the board, of course, I'm talking about that area. Let me try to draw this line. It's not very accurate, but it demonstrates what I'm talking about. I'm trying to highlight the white position. So you need to spot opponent's forces onto this territory. And after that, you can think to yourself, what should you do in order to remove those pieces from your area? And now this is a question for you. We can see two black pieces on the white's territory. This is a black's queen on the h4. This is one piece. And secondly, this is black's pawn onto f4. But of course, first of all, we should take care of the opponent's pieces because they are much more powerful and much more dangerous for you. What can white do in order to push away the black's pieces from his territory? That's right. Most of the students suggested to move g3, which is definitely correct. This is what was played in the actual game. Move g3. Okay, in the game black played queen to h3. If black takes the pawn, it doesn't change the situation dramatically. After that, white can recapture either by the h-pawn or by the f-pawn. Both ways are possible. Maybe in the current position, white may take with the f-pawn because after that, potentially white can use the f-file in order to trade the rooks there. We still may remember that white has the extra pawn, and this is good for white to trade the pieces. So let's try to continue the line. Let's say black plays queen to h3. And now this is my question to you once again. How would you play here as white? Okay, basically three moves were suggested. Bishop f1, queen g2, or rook to f1. First of all, it's very good that you suggested the moves bishop f1 or queen to g2, because indeed the main point of this position is still to neutralize that black's queen on the h3. This is the piece which is invaded into white's territory, and it's really, really dangerous. We need to do something about that. That's why I think that the move queen g2 is really the best. If we imagine that white ignores this rule and play something like rook to f1, then really the situation can be horrible for white. After that, black can execute a sudden sacrifice, bishop takes g3, and then after pawn takes, it's not that black captures the pawn with his queen. This is not dangerous. White will simply play queen g2, covering his king, and there is nothing. But black has the move bishop c6, and this is a deadly idea. After that, white will lose his queen because it can't go away. Black is ready to deliver mate after queen g2 or queen g3 or even queen h1. You just can see that if you ignore the rules of defense, the consequences will be horrible. That's why it is so important to keep the defensive ideas in mind and to follow them. Okay, let's take a step back. So instead of playing rook to f1, as we discussed before, it would have been better to get rid of black's queen. White should play queen g2, neutralizing the black's queen to h3, which invaded into white's territory. And this would be the proper decision. After that, the white's position is secure, there is nothing black can do really, and white will then continue either to push his pawns in the center with, let's say, c4, c5, or playing rook f1, and things are good for white. Actually, I'm not saying that this variation is the only possible solution for white. There can be a few possible moves. The main point is that you keep in mind the key idea, that you need to remove opponent's pieces from your half of the board. That's the main idea. There can be a few moves which follow this rule and which provides the same plan for white. Anyway, let's come back to the actual game. In the actual game, white played g3, and instead of taking that pawn, black moved his queen to h3. Now, we have already discussed a similar situation, so it makes no sense to discuss it again. Once again, there is that intruder into the white's territory, and white needs to do something about that. White needs to either exchange it or push it back, and that's why we should play either bishop f1 or queen to g2. I completely agree with you. Both ways are possible. In the actual game, white played queen to g2. Of course, black is not willing to trade off the queens. He's material down, so he went back with queen to h5. Now there is another question for you, and still you need to figure out what to do. You already know two main defensive rules. The first rule, you should clarify the opponent's threat. Ask yourself the question, what would black do if it would be his turn right now? Which attacking moves he can play, and whether it would be really dangerous for you or not. It's important to highlight the fact that we need to pay attention only to the really dangerous moves, not just any attacking move that he may have. For example, black has the move bishop to h3, but okay, it doesn't make a big difference. White can play queen to e4, and it doesn't really help black to execute his attack. The other idea which black has, the move f3, would be much more unpleasant for white, because after that the white's queen is very limited on its position. If it goes to h1 in the corner, then it's really misplaced, completely out of game. If white goes queen to f1, then it may be even trapped surprisingly with the move bishop h3 on the next move. And therefore we may conclude that the only real threat which black has here is the move f3. So now we have spotted the actual threat. The only actual threat that black has is to advance his pawn to f3 and attack white. Okay, after you have realized the opponent's threat, you may start thinking about the ways to neutralize it. And also you may keep in mind the second rule, which states that if there is an opponent's piece on your half of the board, you should make your best to get rid of it. You can either exchange it or force it to go away. If white tries to play f3 by himself, this might be a possible idea under other circumstances, but here black just can capture the pawn, and on the next move he will be capturing another pawn on the f3. So this variation just doesn't work for white. So let's go back. Some students suggest the move bishop e2 for white. Again, generally speaking, this is a good idea, but in that case black will still play f3 because this advancement is supported by black's queen and rook, and therefore it is still possible. Yeah, that's right. Now I see that most of the students suggest to capture the pawn on f4, and this is very good. Actually, both ways are good. White can either take with a bishop or with a pawn, and both ways are good. Again, you just need to keep in mind the main idea. So in the game, white took with a pawn, and also it puts a little trap for black. If black now inaccurately recaptures the pawn with the move bishop f4, then instead of taking the bishop now, white has a much better option. Can you see it? That's right, I see that you pointed it out correctly. White is going to play rook e7 instead. And after that, white will be attacking both the g7 square and the bishop onto d7, while the black's bishop onto f4 is still hanging, and all in all, this is really, really bad. Black can't play rook g6, attacking the white's queen, because this square is controlled by the white's bishop. And therefore, black will currently be in a serious trouble. Well, I'm not saying that white is winning. Black can keep his position, but white is still a pawn up, and if white can push the black's pieces back and exchange them, he will end up with an extra pawn in an endgame, and it will probably be winning for white. Therefore, black does not want to go the position like that. Oh, that's right. Actually, one student says that after g takes f4, white already has a couple of extra pawns. That is correct. That's why bishop f4 is actually impossible for black, and in the actual game, instead of that, he played the move bishop to g4. He's probably going to play bishop f3, or maybe something else. Okay, let's again recollect the main rule of defense. We need to ask ourselves what is the opponent's attacking idea and whether this is dangerous or not. This is the key moment. You're not just trying to detect the opponent's aggressive moves. There are a lot of them. But you need to focus only on the moves that are really dangerous for you. That's the key. Because if opponent's attacking move doesn't really make any damage for you, then there is no reason for you to defend against it. Now let's just try to think about that. Let's say it is black's turn right now. And let's say he played the move bishop f3. So I would play any random move for white again. I would play that move a3. Of course, it was not played in the game. I played just to see what black is going to do. And let's say black plays that move bishop to f3. After that, as you can see, white can simply move his queen either to g5 or to g3, and there is nothing. Actually, it even helps white, because after queen to g5, white will initiate an exchange of the queens, so it rather helps white. With that in mind, we may conclude that the move bishop f3 is not a threat. And if this is not a threat, there is no reason for white to take any defensive actions against it. Let's come back to the game, and now we're coming to the next idea. If you detected that opponent's threat is not dangerous for you, you can and should realize your own plans. And that's why white played rook a to b1. And here we came to another very important rule of defense. This is the third rule which I'm going to share with you. This is the rule which states that offense is the best defense. I'm pretty sure that you have heard it many times already. But today we will find out why it is so. This is the key. As you can see, when your opponent is trying to attack you, he's advancing his pieces forward. And at the same time, simultaneously, he's weakening the bank ranks. So if you look at the black's pieces now, I will now draw the line. Again, I'm sorry it's not very accurate, but you can see that black's pieces are all very advanced. And they are not covering the black's backward ranks. On the last two ranks of black, black has only the rook onto b8. And that's it. This means that white has very good chances for a counterattack. That's the point of that rule that offense is the best defense. Okay, now I will remove my drawing and we'll continue the game. Black certainly doesn't want to trade off his rook because after that his bank rank will be completely unprotected. That's why he played rook to f8. However, right now white can once again keep attacking black's position. And by the way, let me highlight once again the fact that even though it seems like black's attack is very dangerous, in reality there is nothing too dangerous for white because still bishop f3 is not dangerous for white, and if black takes on to f4, okay, it will attack the f2 square, but ultimately the black's bank rank weakness will remain to be the problem. So black cannot really remove his rooks from the back rank. And white can play rook b5, that is correct. And once again we are attacking our opponent. Offense is the best defense. This is really true and you always need to keep this in mind. Because your opponent will keep attacking you. He will keep doing this until you force him to stop. Until you force him to start defending instead. That's the point of the move rook to b5. Now black needs to move his queen somewhere, and at the same time he needs to keep control over his bishop onto g4, and it's not easy for black to do so. If black plays queen to h4, white can reply with queen to g3 or rook to g5, and it's gonna be bad for black. That's why black tried this desperate move c5, trying to close the line in this manner. Of course white can just capture the pawn. It's gonna be one more extra pawn for white. Now already white has a lot. Black took that pawn on the f4. And there was an exchange on the f4. And we ended up with this position. Okay, now I'm gonna ask you the same question once again. What would you do here if you are playing white? I see that most of the students suggest the move c6. Indeed, this is a very good idea. I agree with you. It would attack the black's queen, would probably force him to go back, so c6 is one very good option. But before we come to the white's ideas, let's just try to realize what black is going to do. And if black has any threats actually. For example, here's the question. Is black really threatening to take rook to f2? Remember, we're not just trying to find aggressive moves. We need to figure out whether it works for your opponent or not, whether it is dangerous for you or not. And in our example, the move rook takes f2, which seems to be dangerous at first glance, upon closer examination, turned out to be not a problem at all, because in the end, white will deliver mate on the last rank with rook to b8. So if black tries to take rook takes f2, white will recapture with a queen, and then will deliver mate with the move rook to b8. That's why actually there is no way for black to take on f2, and this is not a threat. So this is first useful conclusion which we made. After that we can continue thinking about other potential threats black may have. The other threat is a move bishop to f3. And that is really the black's idea. He's going to play bishop f3, attacking the queen. White will probably play something like queen to g3, and then black will play rook to g4, attacking the white's queen and king and queen simultaneously. This is the only real threat which black has. And now when you know the opponent's threat, you can take some measures to get rid of it. Again, I'm not saying that there is a certain best move here for white. There are a couple of ideas. So one of them is to play c6, that's right, and start the counterattack. Another idea, which was executed in the game, is to play rook to b4, because it takes control over the fourth rank, and it prevents black from playing bishop f3 and then rook to g4. In addition to that, it helps white to trade off the pieces. When you're a defender and when you are ahead in material, it is always a good idea to trade off the pieces. You will lead the game towards the end game where you will win easily with your extra material. In the game, black played bishop to f3. Now there was one quite a funny idea that could happen in the game but didn't happen in the actual game. Initially it seems like white should take the rook onto f4, and it's really tempting to make that move. So rook takes f4. White is attacking the black's rook on the f8, and then black obviously needs to recapture, so he will take with his move rook takes f4, and here white will finally detect that the e8 square is under the control of the black's queen. Therefore, there is no way for white to play rook to e8, and then white will find out himself in a serious trouble. The white's queen cannot go away because black is ready to play rook to g4, and then it seems like white should just resign, but in reality white has a fantastical move, bishop to e2, creating a counter pin on the black's queen. Now if black takes the queen onto g2, white will do the same with the move bishop takes h5. This is a really funny idea, and computer in this position suggests another fantastical move. Computer says that black must play queen to e8, installing one more pin, this time on the white's rook. And this creates a totally crazy position, and it's quite funny that almost all the pieces are pinned in one or another way. Okay, it's just a funny position. Of course, white doesn't have to go into that line, and it really didn't happen in the actual game. So let's come back to the actual game situation. After black played bishop to f3, white played queen to g3. This is certainly a much easier way for white. And then the black's attack is almost stopped, because basically there is nothing he can do. In the game he played g5, just protecting the rook, but as you can see, black has no threats at all. Well, the fourth rank is controlled by the white's rook, and therefore there is nothing black can do. White just played rook to e7, and in a few moves black resigned. Currently white is threatening rook takes h7, the black's rook cannot move from the f4 square because white will play queen to e5 check and then queen to g7 mate, and it's totally hopeless, so in a few moves black resigned. This webinar will be recorded, by the way, and below the video you will find the link to all the games shown in this webinar, so if you want to see the whole game you can do it later on. We'll not spend time on that now. Anyway, right now let's draw the conclusions from this game. We have discussed the three main rules of defense. The first rule: you need to clarify opponent's threat. Before you can find the proper defensive move, you need to realize what are the dangerous ideas that your opponent has. Only after that you may decide how to counteract them properly. This was the first very important rule. The second very important rule is to neutralize opponent's pieces on your half of the board. If you do so, there will be no attacking potential in the position of your opponent, and there will be nothing he can do. And the third rule is that offense is the best defense. While trying to attack, your opponent moves his pieces forward and simultaneously he's weakening his back ranks. Okay, these are three most important, most fundamental rules of defense. Now let's take a look at some other examples, and we will see how the same rules were realized in other situations. So now let me come to some other games, and we will see what to do there. Okay, now I have just opened another position. This is from the game between Brown and Keres, two famous grandmasters. This is Rye Lopez, as you may see, a very typical position, and for the club players to play such a position for black is really a very tough task, because there is no available active plan, and it's quite unclear what to do for black. While white will be continuing his development, he may bring his knight from f1 to a better position, he may bring the a1 rook into play, maybe white may push the d-pawn forward, so white has a couple of ideas to increase the pressure onto black's position. And the question is what black should do here. So first let me ask you this question. What do you think? Which ideas black might have in this position? And after you let me know your ideas, we will discuss them, and then we'll decide what should black do. Well, I may give you a little hint. You already know the three main rules of defense, so you may just apply them. Okay, the ideas that student suggests are to play a6 or h6, even knight to b8, or maybe g6. Okay, there are a lot of very interesting ideas. But when you face such a position, there is one thing that you need to know for sure. If you see opponent's pieces on your half of the board, you need to get rid of them. That is for sure, and this is what will secure your position. That's why black needs to take measures against those two bishops. The moves that a lot of students suggested, h6 and a6, are good. Both of them are good. And actually, even at any time in a position like that, it's good to play h6 and a6 and push those bishops back. This is what black did in the game. He played h6, pushing the bishop away. White played bishop to h4. Now again, black has a few possible ideas to push the bishop even back. So the one idea, black may try to play a6, pushing the light squared bishop back. Another idea, black may try to counteract that bishop on h4 while playing either bishop to e7 or g5. And all these three moves are good. Again, there is no single right solution. There are a couple of moves and all of them are pretty good. The main point is that you need to keep in mind the general principle of neutralizing opponent's forces that affect your territory. In our example, the bishop on the h4 is not staying on the black's territory, but nevertheless it puts pressure on the black's territory because it looks on the black's position and it causes some problems for black. In the actual game here, black played bishop to e7. It's one of the possible moves for black. Okay, I see that some students asks about the move g5, isn't it weakening black position? Indeed, the move g5 is weakening black's position, but at the same time it does some positive things as well. It pushes the white's bishop away, and as you can see on the g3, this bishop would be totally passive, and such moves require your accurate calculation, because if there is no way for white to exploit the weaknesses, it's okay for black to play g5. Into the current position, it is possible for black to play that. Okay, now I see that students ask, what if white takes on the g5? That's a good question. Although it's not exactly correct, but if you play blitz games, your opponents will very often do something like that. Let's give it a try. What if white takes? Black will obviously recapture and white takes with the bishop. This is a very common sacrifice and you need to know how to react. For lots of players this would be a very difficult task, but for you it's a lot easier because you already know the rules of defense. So first of all, you need to realize what is the opponent's attacking idea. The opponent's idea is to use that pin on black's knight. So white will probably play something like queen to f3, then maybe he will play knight to e3 and knight to d5, trying to bring more and more pressure onto that knight. If white tries to transfer his rook or the queen to the g-file, in the current position it doesn't seem very dangerous for black. At least black always can play bishop to g7, so I don't think it will really cause problems for him. White can play bishop to g7 and then move his king to f8 if necessary, so there is nothing white can really do on the g-file. Therefore, the only possible idea that white may have is to play queen to f3 and then exploit this pin. And that brings us to the conclusion that black needs to neutralize the pin. And secondly, as always, if you see an opponent's piece on your half of the board, you need to do something about that. You need to get rid of it. So I think the best idea for black is to play bishop on e7 and on the next move to push away that bishop or exchange it. Black can then move the knight somewhere to play knight h7, for example. So let's just imagine how the game may continue. White will, let's say, play queen to f3, or any other move which he intended to play. Black will then continue attacking the white's bishop on the g5 and forcing it either to exchange or to go back. If white tries to go forward with bishop h6, then we will face the similar situation. There is an opponent's intruder onto your territory and you need to exchange it or push it away. How can black do it? What can black do in order to get rid of that bishop from h6? That's right, most of the students suggest to move bishop g5, and that is correct. After that you will exchange the only opponent's piece on your territory around your king, and the white's attack is over. There is nothing for white then. If necessary, you can even bring the rook there, and the next moves would then rook to e6, rook to g6, and maybe even black will be attacking on the king side. Okay, let's come back to the actual game. It was a little deflection, but anyway, I think it was very useful because we just realized how to handle the situations when your opponent is trying to sacrifice the knight on the g5 and then realize his attack. So we're coming back to the actual game. Black just played bishop to e7. White continued with knight to e3. Now once again there are a few white pieces which influences black's territory. In the particular position, still there are two bishops which look at black's territory, and with his last move white brought the knight into e3, which is ready to invade onto the d5 or maybe f5 square in a suitable moment. So the question for black would be how to exchange those three active pieces. The knight onto e3, the bishop onto g4, and the bishop onto h4. If black can exchange them, he will solve all his problems, all in once. Okay, I see that the suggestions are knight to g4 and knight to h7. Very good. Indeed, knight to h7 is possible, it trades off the bishop, but knight g4 would be better because it trades off all the white's active pieces, all of them. And this is a big achievement for black. In the game, white took bishop takes e7. White recaptured with the knight because after that he's initiating also an exchange of the bishop. Then white can either trade bishops onto d7 or white can take on g4, but it doesn't change anything too much. So in the game, white took on the g4, trying to keep more pieces into play, because then black may not recapture with the bishop onto g4, the rook on the e8 is hanging, and therefore black must take the bishop onto b5. This was played in the game, and then white continued with knight to h4. He's trying to continue his attack by all means. Although it seems like he doesn't really have too many resources there, he is still insistently trying to move his pieces there. Now the question is how to defend. Well, first of all, we can see that at the moment there are no big threats from the white side, so black may not worry too much about that. And secondly, we know that if you see opponent's pieces that are looking at your territory and they are ready to do something against you, you need to get rid of them. So the moves which were suggested by the students are queen to d7, bishop to d7, or knight to g6. All of them are possible, certainly. But if you play queen to d7, it doesn't really do anything against white's threats, and he will continue his attack. If you go knight to g6, then, well, from the strategic standpoint, white can remove his knight to f5, and, he would save this knight from the exchange. But from the tactical standpoint, white has an even better way. He can exchange the knights, and after that he will play queen b3 check, attacking both the king and the bishop, and this is simply winning for white. Therefore, the move knight to g6 does not work for black for tactical reasons. Yeah, we need to be really careful while defending our position. So let's come back to the actual game. Initially, we've had three suggestions like queen d7, bishop d7, and knight to g6. If we come to realize that knight to g6 doesn't work and queen to d7 doesn't do much, then we have only last move which remains, is bishop d7, and this is what was played in the game. Now black is solidifying his position a lot, and on the next move he is ready to either trade off one of the knights or to play knight g6. White continued with rook to e3. He is ready to play rook g3 potentially, and then install this rook against black's king. While the black's idea is still the same. There are those two knights which are dangerous for black, which are looking at black's territory, and black needs to do something about that. The white's knight onto g4 is already under black's attack, and black can take it any time. But there is the other knight, the knight on the h4, which is still there, and black needs to do something about that. That knight can be attacked by the black's knight from g6 or by the black's queen from d8. That's why I would say that there are a couple of good moves for black. Yeah, a lot of students suggested the move knight d5, and that is a very good idea. But actually, even if you play any other move, even simple move like knight to c6, it would be good as well, because you still follow the main idea. But knight d5 is very good. So if you play the move like that, this is a discovered attack on the white's knight on the h4, so then after that exchange, black will secure his position completely. The moves like f5 or h5, they can be played of course, but you see that before playing the moves like that, you need to be very careful. So if you're going to weaken your position even more with some advancements, you need to evaluate the consequences very well. For example, if you try something like h5 or f5, you're weakening your position, and this might be possible, yeah, but you need to evaluate it very accurately. Like if you go h5, this is an interesting idea, you're going to capture the knight, but white may try to sacrifice it with playing like knight to h6, for example, check, following with queen takes h5, and I'm not saying that this is bad for black, but what I am saying is that you need to calculate this variation very accurately. You need to make sure that you're just not losing here. Okay, anyway, actually all the ideas which you suggested are good. Again, there are a few possible moves for black that may get rid of those knights. And if you pursue the right idea, then everything will be good. Some students asked about the move g5 for black. Well, in general, it may be possible in some other situations, but here white can jump with his knight either to f6 or to capture the pawn on the h6, so it's not going to be good for black. But in general, if white couldn't make one of these two moves, it could be possible for black. Anyway, I'm glad that you followed the bottom line. In the actual game, black played king to h7. I think it's a little too passive, and the other ideas which we analyzed, like knight to d5, could have been more interesting. But anyway, black realizes the same idea, just he makes it in a more timid way. He played with king to h7, and then after the white's move rook to g3, black played knight to g8. So he's overprotecting his position. And again, I do not think it is really necessary, but he's just playing too carefully. Anyway, it's good because he follows the right plan. He's going to attack the white's knight on the h4 and force it to go away. The other knight on the g4 is still under the control of the black's bishop, and he's ready to eliminate it at any moment. And then on the next move, black is ready to play knight f6. White removed his knight to f3. Probably he didn't want to exchange it after knight to f5. And also, let's just take a step back. If white tries to play knight to f5, then black can continue attacking that knight, and he can play pawn to g6. And then the knight will have to come back to e3, which is really sad. Then black may even continue and play h5. So here, surprisingly, the black's knight on the g8 is standing very well. Anyway, it didn't happen in the actual game, so let's just come back to the real game situation. White played knight to f3, going backward, and this is very good for black. Here, black can either play knight to f6, forcing the white's knight to go away, or what he did in the game, he just took that knight, and this is good as well. He just took the knight, and after that, white obviously should recapture with rook takes g4, and after that, black continues with knight to f6, pushing that rook to go away. White played rook to h4, and potentially in some variations, he's preparing the move knight to g5, making this check using the fact that the black's pawn is pinned, and after that maybe white can play queen b3. Well, probably white would play queen b3 first and only then knight to g5, so it might cause some little problems for black. That's why he played king to g8, and now his position is completely safe. There is no way for white to continue his attack. There is completely no way, and that's why, I mean, we may already conclude that the white's attack was repelled successfully. During this whole game, black simply used constantly this one rule, a single rule, to find opponent's pieces on your territory and neutralize them. You can neutralize them by attacking them and forcing them to go back, or by exchanging them. This is what black did in this game, and he refuted the white's attack very, very easily. So if you do the same, if you just keep this rule in mind, it will help you a lot. As you can see, the rule is very simple. Very often there are a couple of ways for you to realize this rule and to follow it. And after some practice, you will even start doing it automatically. And it's going to be really, really easy and really effective. Okay, we will not analyze this game until the end. In the future, actually, if you're curious, here black played d5 and started his counterattack in the center, and then he invaded along the d file and he even won the game. Actually, it happened pretty easily for him. Once again, the webinar will be recorded and you will find the complete games below the video, so you can check them later. Now let's come to the next example, and we will analyze a few other very interesting games. Okay, let's come to this position. In just a moment, it will be opened. Yeah, there we go. It's the position from the game between Grishuk and Galfand, two top grandmasters, one of the top players in the world, and currently it is black to play. White tries to create some threats on the king side, and black needs to decide what to do. So first I'd like to hear your opinions. Please tell me what you think. Which move could be good for black? And before you tell me your opinion, let's just recollect the rules of defense. So we know three of them mainly. The one which states that you need to clarify the opponent's threat first. And the key point of this idea is not just to spot the aggressive idea that your opponent has, but to evaluate whether this is dangerous for you or not. That's the real question. So the question which I'm going to ask you now is, what happens after white captures that pawn on the h6? Is it really dangerous for black or not? What do you think? If we just imagine that black play any random move and then white continues and he takes that pawn on the h6. Okay, I will now play any random move for black and then we'll just see what happens after that. So let's say I play rook d7 just to give the move to white and to see what's going to happen next. Let's say he takes that pawn. At the moment, obviously, there are no threats. The black skin is totally protected. And even if white plays with queen to h5 on the next move, still there are no threats. The black skin is protected by his knight. Because after queen h5, I mean, the h8 square is already under the control of the black's knight. If white sacrifices the rook on the g6, okay, it's just one check, there is nothing after that. So we may conclude that rook h6 is not terribly dangerous for black. Yes, white won the pawn, this is what happened, but anyway, it's not that much dangerous. The next thing that we know is the rule which states that offense is the best defense. Usually, if you can start executing your own aggressive ideas and force your opponent to forget about his attack, it's gonna be the most effective measure. So let's imagine that black plays king to g7 protecting the pawn. White will probably continue his attack, most likely with the move queen to h5, this is pretty obvious, and then he is attacking the pawn on the h6, and now it seems to be much more dangerous than before. This time black will have to play rook to h8 to protect that pawn, but this is certainly not what black wants to do, because in this way we put the rook on a very passive position. Then white will continue his attack, maybe with a move like g4, and black still holds the position, but it's quite unpleasant. And white is rolling his attack very easily and flawlessly, without any problems. This is what happens if you ignore the right rules of defense. Again, we need to defend only if opponent's threats are really dangerous. If you detect that they are not really dangerous, that they are not really causing a huge damage to you, then there is no need for you to defend. Instead, you need to realize your own attacking plan. By doing this, you will take advantage of the situation that your opponent removed his pieces from the back ranks and weakened them. And then you will start your own counter-attack and you will force your opponent to forget about his attacking intentions. So this is a very powerful idea which we always need to keep in mind. So now I'm coming back to the starting position. If we know that the move rook takes h6 is not a serious problem for black, then instead of trying to defend, you may ask yourself what black can do here. How can black realize his attacking ideas? And now let's think about that. So let me ask you this question. What do you think? How can black try to expand, to go forward, to create any problems for white? I see a couple of suggestions. The one suggestion is knight takes f4. Well, this is impossible because the pawn is protected by the rook from f1. The move rook to c4. Again, generally speaking, it could be a good idea, but right now this is impossible. This is covered by the white's queen, and the f4 square is covered by the white's rook. So immediately black cannot go forward. But black can first play b5, that's right. This is what he played in the game. After b5, black can either continue with rook to c4 with the support of his pawn, attacking the white's pawn on the f4, or black can continue pushing the pawn playing b4, and it will disturb the white's knight, and it's not that easy to realize where the knight will go. Probably white will have to go on the edge and replace it to a very passive position. That's why b5 is a very effective idea. White took rook takes h6, and here black continued with b4, attacking that knight on the c3. As you can see, there are no convenient squares for this knight to go to. That's why white took the pawn, and black obviously recaptured with a queen. Now you can see that this queen is putting pressure on the white's knight on the b3 and indirectly on the pawn onto b2. Also, black is currently attacking that pawn on the f4, which is really unpleasant for white. And all in all, the white situation all of a sudden became quite crucial. And this is a very typical idea, and once again I want to highlight this fact. When your opponent starts his attack, your initial impulse is to start defending. This is the most natural reaction. But this is the most natural reaction of weak players. Strong players know that when your opponent is attacking, when he is moving his forces forward, when he is moving his pawns forward, he is weakening all the backward ranks. For example, right here, you can see that white tried to attack on the king side and he moved his rook there. Yeah, from the attacking standpoint this is good, but from the other hand, this rook is completely out of the game. Also, we can see that that knight on the b3 doesn't really have any good squares to go to. While trying to attack on the king side, white advanced his pawns to f4 and e5, and now they became the object of an attack. Well, this is the negative side of opponent's attack, and you always need to remember about it. So when your opponent is attacking, he is weakening his position simultaneously. And you can and should take advantage of it. If you understand this idea very well, you will then understand the real reason behind the rule, offense is the best defense. Because everybody heard about this rule, but no one can really follow it. But after this webinar, you will be able to do that, because you will understand the inherent idea behind this general rule, offense is the best defense. And the idea is that you need to take advantage of your opponent's too expanded position. And by starting your counterattack, you will very quickly force him to forget about his attack and to start caring about defending his own position. Okay, so we'll finish with this game. Again, you will find the complete game with commentaries below the video. This webinar will be recorded and you will find the complete game there. Now let's just go forward and take a look at some other examples. For example, here is one of them. You will see the screen soon. This game was played actually just a few days ago. It was the United States Junior Closed Tournament. And the players seem to be quite strong. The white player is a FIDE master, the black player is a national master. Currently this is white to move. And now I'd like you to try to implement the rules of defense that we have learned. So, first of all, you can ask yourself, what are the aggressive attacking ideas, potential ideas of your opponent? So if you're playing white, you need to ask yourself this question. Which potential attacking ideas black can execute? How can black try to attack? Obviously, black will try to attack the white's king, and there are not so many ways for black to do so. Actually, maybe the only way to attack the king somehow is to bring the queen along the 7th rank to g7 and after that to h6. But if black can play that, it's gonna be fatal for white. This is just mate. Okay, this is the first thing which we just realized, the black's attacking idea. After that, we need to apply another rule of defense. We know that if you can see an opponent's piece on your half of the board, you need to take actions against it. You need to either exchange it or push it away. With that in mind, let me ask you, what should white play now? How should white stop black from executing his attacking idea? Very good. Almost all of you have suggested the move rook to a2, and this is definitely correct. There is the opponent's intruder on your half of the board, you need to take actions against it. You can play rook to a2. Yes, you can play any rook to a2. If you have these rules of defense in mind, you would play such a move automatically. So when I saw this position, the move rook a2 was one of the very first moves which I thought about. So you can spot such ideas very quickly, within a few seconds. While in the actual game, white player took on the a6 and black replied with queen g7 and the game was over. So white was lost. You can see how important these defensive ideas are. While ignoring them, white lost the game instantly. Well, his position was actually not that bad. Let's come back to the actual game. Indeed here, I think that instead of rook to a6, the best way would be to play rook to a2. Surprisingly, even after that, there is one very shocking way, I would say, for black to still win the game. But the way is very difficult to find, and I think there would be tremendous chances for white to save the game or even win it, because it's really difficult for black to find the right way. The right variation starts from rook to c6. At very first glance it seems like white is in trouble because the queen is trapped, but upon closer examination you will see that white has a nice counterblow. White has the move bishop takes d5. And then white is putting the pin on the black's rook, and this time it seems like white is winning. White just captured the pawn, the very important central pawn, but it turns out to be the same. Black has the way for a win, but it is, again, a very tough idea. Black needs to trade the white's bishop and then to play g5. After that, black is preparing a discovered attack on the white's queen with the move rook to h6. It's gonna be check on the white's king, and also it's gonna attack that queen onto d5. Even if white plays king g2 and removes his king from that check after rook h6, then danger comes from the other side. Black can continue with rook to c2 and deliver that check from the other square. Okay, some students asks, what if queen to f3 on the previous move? Well, queen to f3 would save the queen, but black can play g4 instantly. So if you try queen to f3, black would play g4 straight away. And that way he would win the game easily. Anyway, that idea of playing g5 was very shocking, very unexpected, and I think that in a real game black maybe wouldn't find it, and white would keep playing in the game. Okay, let's go next. So here we just seen the great importance of following the rules of defense and keeping them in mind. Now let's go next to another example. This time we'll be playing black, and this is a little bit tricky position. This position happened in my bullet game, so it was a 1-minute game actually. So I was playing just for fun in the internet, and into this position white found a move queen takes to f5, which looks really impressive. White is sacrificing the queen, and it has a lot of sense. White is ready to either capture the queen or to play queen to h7. And if black tries to capture the queen, then white would play rook to d8. But again, when you're playing the game, you need to keep in mind the rule offense is the best defense. And if you keep this in mind, you will very easily find the refutation. And I see that most of the students have found it successfully, and that's the move rook to e1. That's correct. This is the only way to survive, and not only to survive, but to win the game. Win the game on the spot straight away. Here white just resigned. Again, you would find this move easily if you have the right focus. If you have the focus on founding counter-attacking ideas, and if you keep in mind the idea that offense is the best defense. Although here it seems like a completely sudden tactical shot, in reality the idea is still very common. The point is that when you are starting your own attack, you are deflecting your opponent from his plans. This is what's happening, and that's why the counterattack is very often successful. In this example, it's still the same. Although black is using the tactical way, but the strategic idea is still the same. Black is deflecting white from his plans. White was going to use the back rank weakness along the d-file, and currently black is deflecting white rook from that square. After rook takes e1, black would simply play queen takes f5, and black is ahead in material, and of course he's winning. Well, white can try the last joke. Maybe he can try rook takes e5. If black inaccurately captures the pawn, white will play knight to f7 check, but of course black doesn't have to fall into this trap. Instead, he can simply play any move of his queen, basically. Anyone is good. Queen b1 is the best, that's right. Okay, so this was the tactical example, but mainly I'd like you to focus on the general idea. The general idea that you always need to keep in mind the attacking moves. Okay, now we are finishing for today, and let me just once again describe these three main ideas of defense, the three main ideas that we discussed. Let me try to show them on the screen as well. If I can find it quickly, I'll show it to you. Yes, there we go. In a moment you will be able to see that position on the screen, and also to observe the rules that we have discovered today. So the first rule is this: you need to clarify the opponent's threat first. Only after that you will be able to find proper defense. And the key idea here is not to be scared by various attacking possibilities that your opponent has. You need to stay cool and to ask yourself whether they are really dangerous or not. And only if you detect that the opponent's threat is really causing some serious damage for you, only then you need to take actions against it. Otherwise, there is no reason for defense. You want to attack. And this brings us to the second rule, which states that offense is the best defense. Keep in mind that the opponent's attack has a negative side. The negative side of this coin is that while expanding and moving his forces forward, your opponent is weakening his backward ranks. You can take advantage of that. You can start your counterattack and you will force your opponent to forget about his plans. You will force him to go back and to protect his own position. And that is the most powerful thing you can do to stop his attack. Offense is the best defense. That's the second gold rule of defense. However, not always you can counterattack. And in that situation, you need to recollect the third gold rule of defense. It is to neutralize opponent's forces on your half of the board. If you follow this rule for some time, it'll start happening automatically. Anytime you will spot an opponent's piece on your half of the board, you will instantly get rid of it. You can push it back or you can exchange it. In either case, you need to force it to go away. If you follow just these 3 golden rules of defense, in most of the cases you will be able to find proper defensive moves. Today we analyzed very difficult games played by grandmasters. And you have seen that if you know just these 3 rules, you could find the proper moves very easily and you could neutralize the opponent's ideas without any problems. Well, of course, I'm not saying that this is all that you can and should know about defense. Of course, this topic is much wider, but even if you know at least these 3, it's already gonna work very well for you, because unfortunately during just 1 hour of our webinar I cannot explain everything to you, but even just these 3 rules will already work very, very well for you. So thanks again for attending the webinar. And as I have told you, it will be recorded and you will find this webinar on our website, chess-teacher.com, and there you will find the video and all the games used in the webinar. And certainly we will conduct more webinars in the future, so follow our news. Again, on the website you can see about all my upcoming events. So if you haven't yet subscribed for our newsletters, you can do it there as well. I will now post the link where you can go and subscribe for the newsletters if you haven't done it yet. And then you will be notified about all the new webinars and all new events that I will ever conduct. Thanks again.